Hello there, and welcome to the Whole Healed Holy podcast, a place for conversations of the heart, for exploring healing, divinity, and all things sacred. I'm your host, Patricia Russo. I'm a mystic, muse, and spiritual teacher, guiding women into their hearts with a journey of softening. I'm a published poet, a lover of hearts, and a forever student. Welcome, love, to a sacred pause and hopefully a few tingles, and to a reminder that we are all whole, healed, and holy. I'm so happy you are here. Let's slip into today's episode.
I want to softly and ever so intentionally slip into today's episode with lots of care and great reverence for our topic, and even more for my guest. This topic is tender and full of emotion, and one of great interest and intimidation too. And I feel incredibly blessed to have my guest here today to share her wisdom as we dive in together. Carla is the owner of A Venerated Death, End of Life. She is an end of life coach, death doula and midwife, home funeral guide, and funeral celebrant. Carla received both her end-of-life coaching and death doula certifications through her coursework with the Conscious Dying Institute in Boulder, Colorado. Carla also studied under Olivia Bareham from Sacred Crossings in LA, where she was given the wisdom and tools to help advocate and support families wanting to give their loved ones the sacred art of home funerals and after body care. Carla also received her Funeral Celebrant Certificate through her coursework with Olivia as well. Carla is a volunteer at Denver Hospice, where she continues to learn and expand her understanding and experiences working with the dying. This work and the wisdom that it holds is and will be a lifelong journey for Carla. And she's always continuing to broaden her learning, education, and knowledge in the death doula field. Carla hosts a monthly death discussion and a parent loss grief circle for individuals like herself that have lost a parent in their 20s and 30s. She is passionate about normalizing the topic of death and dying in everyday conversations. Carla has sat bedside to many people in their final days, and her hope is to help her community bring death back to its sacred place through her end-of-life care service offerings. Carla meets people within this part of life with a radical presence of non-judgment, support, and a bold vulnerability. Woo. Thank you for being here with me today, Carla. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
I feel this might feel like a simple and obvious way to begin, but I feel that it is like so important, and it will perhaps set the stage and the tone for our discussion today. What is death? Can you bring us into your world, please? I'd like to begin here and perhaps define a few more words and terms as we flow, but can you tell us what death is?
Yeah. So death is the death of the physical presence that we have within this gift of being in our bodies. So it's the death of the body and our participation in life. But death can also be death in nature, the seasons changing, death and change that is inevitable, that's happening all the time, all around us, interpersonally and not. But there's death happening all the time, and we wouldn't be here and be able to have this life without it. So it's also that kind of recycling into the newness and new beginnings and new approaches and transformation. But we will be talking more about the physical death of the body. I'm thinking today.
Okay. Yeah, it seems, and I think that's why I maybe said it seems so simple, but it is so simple yet so profound. And what you just said is, it's like it's the thing that we are surrounded by, that we have the most examples of, that is the constant, right? And actually so obvious that we avoid, is probably like one of the biggest things that we avoid talking about or facing until we're faced with facing it. How has your definition of death, or your deeper understanding and respect for it, been influenced by the death that you have personally experienced in your life? Particularly, like, how did losing a parent inspire this work or become a teacher for you?
Oh, yeah. 100%. After my father's death in 2016, I don't think I'd be here without that experience. It definitely was like a guiding light into this work, based on just how significant that loss was in my life. I was very close to my father. My dad was very much a pillar in our family dynamic. And along with his loss, I also lost that dynamic of my family as well, just as it happens. So lots of things died, including him when he also died. So I think my experience of losing him on it's a big and it's broad, from his diagnosis. So he was diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis in September of 2016, and then he died in December of 2016. So it wasn't necessarily a sudden death, but it felt very much like that, just because it was just so progressed and just so fast. So it was hard for me to get a grip on not only him having this illness and watching him and his body deplete because of this illness and change. I didn't know how to be there for him. I didn't know how to support him, and I felt really uncomfortable with that. And then also with my own mortality, it definitely lit up a bunch of fears and phobias and things that I'm not comfortable with, which I think fed into my inability to feel like I could really hold his fears. And I knew that he was scared, even though he wouldn't really talk about it. So those things were kind of like mark one, like, I don't like this. This isn't like this, not that it was very normal, but I didn't like the way that played out. And then also going through kind of the medical side of things, I also didn't like the way that we didn't know how to advocate for him. We didn't know what he wanted. He was pretty much unconscious by the time we had to make really big decisions for him. And it was just so overbearing and just so much that we all kind of just felt like we were doing, I mean, obviously with love still, as the undercurrent of that experience definitely existed, but our understanding of what to do for him was very lost. And so that didn't feel good either. And then there was also these beautiful moments that I had with him in his dying phase, where he was telling me these stories. Like, he was telling me ancestral connections and stories of his passing and his transition in a very metaphoric way, but very real to him. And I feel like I was the only one that got that opportunity to really sit by and listen to him. And for some reason, it just felt like he wanted me close to be able to express these things. And I didn't judge him. I didn't tell him, oh, like, Dad, you're just tired. Oh, Dad, like, you're just on a lot of morphine. I didn't do any of those things. I just kind of held that space for him. Mm-hmm. And it was beautiful and intense. And then after his passing too, just all of that combined, and all of those uncomfortable moments, all of those that lack of understanding how to navigate someone's end of life experience, all those questions I didn't ask, my mortality and my uncomfortability with that. And then plus this really kind of what I would explain as like holy ground in a way. Like, it was a very heightened spiritual experience that I was very curious about, that I just started to investigate. And I started to read books and listen to podcasts and kind of be like, what was that? There was something there. And I do think that it was very much grief ridden. I think that I missed him and I wanted to connect with that. That was the last experience that I had with him. So I wanted to be submerged in those last moments as long as I could. So there was those ties as well that I acknowledge now. At the moment, I didn't. But I just started to really dive into it as like a hobby. And then it led me into finding death doula education. And then I was like, a bunch of other things shifted and changed in my life due to the pandemic, that I left a job that I had been in for 10 years that I thought I would do for the rest of my life. And I started to do this work. So to answer your question, he is the motivating force behind where I'm at and the why.
What an incredible gift he gave you in those bedside moments. In hindsight, but it's always in hindsight, right? Like this was the formative moment of like really preparing you with someone that you love, and a real impression that stays with you. Absolutely. Or that informed the rest, I would imagine, is informing the rest of this work. Mm-hmm. I think, and I wasn't planning on sharing this, but one of the reasons why finding you resonated, and then when you shared your bio about the loss of this parent, and what you just shared about how grief and loss affects a family as a system, is really true. Because I lost my sister 3 years ago, I'll be 4 years in August. And I've said this before, the way in which we grieve is so unique. Each person has, yes, there are the phases of grief, and perhaps there's some universality to grief and grieving, the way in which we maybe as humans grieve. But I think the way that each person grieves, and it's certainly not linear, is so unique. And the way in which a sister grieves the loss is different than the way in which a parent grieves the loss, in the way in which a husband or a daughter grieves the loss. And you really get to kind of be in the system of that when the loss affects a family.
Yeah.
And so I love that you just touched on that. And then I also love, and we will go into this because I think this is really the main reason why I wanted to have this conversation. I think it takes experiencing a loss like this as a family, perhaps, to realize all the things that you don't know and how unprepared you are for this very precious moment.
Yeah.
And I think, and then sadly, because there isn't a lot of this talked about, or there isn't a lot of this, what we're going to talk about here, what you're doing with your life now, thanks to Papa, we're left after the fact wondering, did we make the right decisions, or thinking that we could have done a better job. It could have been more graceful, or it could have been more thoughtful, or we didn't even realize that we had this other option. And so I love that you've presenced that at the beginning of this conversation, because first of all, I love that the loss of your papa, I'm sorry about that, but I love that he has informed this work, and now you're touching the lives of so many as a result of that. And I think that's one of, if there was going to be an additional, I can't remember the person who created the phases of grief, but if there was going to be an additional one, this idea of making the loss up into purpose is one of the additional phases of that grief. And you really are making this loss into a beautiful purpose in your life. And that feels really, really beautiful. So I just want to see you in that and celebrate that for a moment.
Thank you. I love that.
Your father's name?
Fred Torres. His name is Ferdinand Torres, but he went by Fred.
Fred. Okay. So yeah, I feel like Fred is here with us and here with you in your work, which is really beautiful. I'd love to learn more about about exactly what an end of life coach is, and also what a death doula and midwife is. I think it's important to understand these terms and roles that you take in your work, of course. And also, I'm feeling like the concept of death doula, it feels sort of new or modern, but I'm wondering if it has an older, I'm imagining in other cultures, not in our American culture, it's like we want nothing to do with death, and we're sort of ignoring it and pretending like it's not happening. We're even we're biohacking so that we can stay alive longer, and we're doing all these things culturally, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I feel like maybe there have been death doulas or midwives in other cultures, because there are other cultures that I know, as I'm researching a little bit more of this out of my own curiosity. But I feel like death doulaing and getting a certificate in death doulaing is sort of a modern or newish concept in the US. Can you tell us exactly what end of life coaching is and what death doula and midwifing is, so that we have a really good appreciation of what it is that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the term doula, or the meaning of doula, is someone who holds space, or someone who is in that liminal space from one thing to the next, just like a birth doula. So a death doula is much like a birth doula, holding kind of that threshold space of into life. So new life, which is also a very big portal space if you've had children. And then also a death doula is just on the other end of that, of holding space from that transition from life to death. But my definition of what an end of life coach is, or a death doula, or a death midwife, is very different. And it's actually something that I've continued to think about. And, my identity around that with my work is that, I guess at the moment I would make an edit, and I wouldn't call myself an end of life coach as much as just a death doula and a death midwife. I think I was kind of wearing the hat of an end of life coach because that's the training I did with the Dying Conscious Institute, where it was a 2-parter where it was teaching people how to plan for death, which is a very much needed space. But I think I do that in and of itself in all of my death doula work. So now it would just be twofold for me, where a death doula is someone who helps you navigate end of life choices and options, who is fundamentally the front person of understanding what it is that the dying wants and needs, what the terminal illness is, what's the cause of death. Is this person willing to go off treatment? Does this person need hospice? Do they need palliative care? Do they need to be at home? What assistance and services do they need to be at home? What are their feelings about medication at end of life? What is are they more trying to go a holistic round where it's a combination of the both? How do they live their life? Who are the people that are important to them? Who are the people that we're doing this together? And it's really a team effort. And I feel like what a death doula, or the space that a death doula holds within that family dynamic, is someone to allow or to take the burdens of speaking to medical staff about things that we've already talked about, that we already know, making sure I'm advocating hey, they need more morphine, or they need Ativan, they're feeling stressed, they want, this is what they need for the family, this is what the dying has requested, being that forefront person so the family can be bedside, so the family can think about the time that they have, which is so precious and so important. And I feel like majority of families don't get that in a wholeness sort of way, because they're worried about talking to the doctors, they're worried about pain management symptoms, they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with the funeral home afterwards. There's just so much, taking off work, the family, and especially that front caregiver, depending on that dynamic and how that's working out, they have so much on their plate that I just don't think that they get that tenderness of just being in the moment. So a perfect scenario would be that someone gets maybe a 6-month or less prognosis of of an illness, and we meet then, and we're like, okay, here we go. Where are we at? What do we need? What do we want? And we a death doula helps it from that point all the way to the end. So I'm saying last breath. So my death doula services or offerings are everything that happens before a death has occurred.
Wow.
And then my death midwife services is everything after death. So that could be help with funeral arrangements. Obviously, I'm not a funeral director or work for a funeral home, but I have really great resources and really great relationships in my community with funeral homes. So if I know already this person wants to be cremated, or water cremated, fire cremated, they want a green burial, they want a traditional burial, they want a burial at sea, all of these different things I'm well versed in, and most doulas are. around body disposition and what your options are, because that's primarily what our job is to know and educate ourselves deeply on what the end of life options are, whether that be from a medical, we're non-medical, but understanding what medical procedure is as much as we can and building those relationships, and also non-medical treatments. Even psychedelics are used at end of life that we're also educated on, some more than others. And, I'm just kind of giving you a broad understanding of like what we're educating ourselves on or what our resource is. So after the last breath, it would be helping with funeral arrangements. Again, I am a funeral celebrant, so I could also facilitate and host that funeral celebration or that last goodbye, however they wanted it. Also, I'm a home funeral guide, and that's the work that I did with Olivia Bareham in LA, which she is just a dear teacher of mine and just a wonderful person, and who has been actively bringing the art of home funerals back to the US in such a beautiful and delicate way. And if you can listen to her on a podcast or listen to her speak about it, it's very worthwhile. But basically putting the care of our dead loved ones back into the home, back into the care of the family. So we know regulation, we know law, because there are laws and perimeters around keeping your dead at home. But there's so much beauty of and ritual and ceremony that you can do within this space, that I say ritual and ceremony, but it's really the simplicity of caring for your dead, which I find to be a ritual and a ceremony, but in a non-religious way. So I'm also well-versed in doing that. Or even maybe they don't want the full 3-day vigil, but they want to have ceremony or a washing or a ritual of some sort that they want to honor for their loved one before they go to their next thing. I think our culture is just so quick to take our dead and bring death behind closed doors, which I think that isn't healthy. I don't think that brings health or wellness to our perceptions and our experience around death, and feeds into the phobias and the anxieties and the taboo when that happens. So death doulas definitely help, or death midwifing during that time is creating the space, making the space happen in a seamless sort of way. It's like, hey, yeah, we don't need to rush. We don't have to go anywhere. I can make sure that you have this time. I can talk to these people and make sure that we're going to do this. So the medical, maybe someone dies in ICU, you can still have that space. I can talk to the funeral home and let them know that you're having this space, and I can call them when they're done or when you're ready for them to be picked up. I can arrange all these different things. So it's really just a front person on both ends. So before death and after death. And the one thing I didn't mention about the death doula also that I'm huge in, that I'm a huge advocate for, and a big part of my work is advanced directives. So advanced care directives, which is your DNR, your healthcare proxies and advocates, getting them in line, having a death file folder somewhere in your home that has all your necessary and important paperwork, so that if something sudden or unexpected was to happen to you at any time. So sometimes we think about only having this stuff done or taking care of it when we're maybe in an elderly age, but I think people in high school should be learning about advanced directives and putting those things on paper, because you just never know. So that's a big part of what I do as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much for for really going into the detail of it. And now I understand the doula is the midwife is on the front end and the doula is on the back end. Or
doula on the front end and midwife on the back end.
Doula is ushering you into the transition, so you're
holding that space as well.
Yeah, the doula is really for the dying.
Absolutely.
And the midwife is really for the grieving after. Is that how you would look at it? And so much of this, it's so beautiful that you attend to both parts of this, because there's a real need for holding of both parts of this.
Yeah.
And really, in my estimation, it's sad but true, so much of loss and death is for the living.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because we're the ones that are surviving and we're the ones that are having to do the grieving. I didn't ask you, and I don't know what your spiritual belief is. And we talk a lot about spirituality on this podcast, and I'm in this work as a spiritual person. So no matter what you believe, if you're listening, like after transitioning from the body into wherever it is you feel like you're going is a really beautiful moment to have a doula. I'm feeling like to have that sorted for myself would be like a really beautiful peace of mind. And we can talk about that in a moment. But there's so much of this on the other side of it that once you're gone, you don't really care about, but that needs to be tended to. That is so important to have someone. And I love also this concept of slowing time during this, like being really careful during this moment, because I know other cultures do this. I know other cultures are a little bit more careful and thoughtful and graceful at this in their homes, with the way in which they prepare the dead and sit with the dead and honor the dead after the last breath. And the fact that we don't do this so much in the US, I feel a big tingle about any effort that's being made around bringing this back to anybody who's feeling called to have it this way. Because there is, and we see this happening with the way that children come into the world too. It's very fast and it's very medical and it's very kind of matter of fact. And so it makes sense that we see this sort of on the other end of life too, where it's like, okay, it's all done this way and there's no talking about it and we're just handling it. And it feels kind of very clinical, rather than graceful.
Yeah.
Talking about death sometimes feels really taboo, and you just mentioned this before this question, but I'm wanting to go into this now. Like, why is this? Is this cultural? Is it societal? Are there cultures and societies in the world where this is not the case, where death is honored and celebrated and given the respect, grace, and consciousness that you believe in? Like, where do you draw? And maybe Olivia, your teacher, where do the two of you draw your inspiration? Are there some kind of religious aspects or spiritual aspects? Are there cultural aspects? But first, let's touch on this. Like, what is it? Is it the fear of dying? And what is the taboo around it? Why is this not a popular topic for discussion? And then I would love to know where you're drawing some inspiration for how do you bring the honoring back and the grace back and the sort of the midwifey stuff that you do, I feel like.
Right. I think it's a big question, and I know what I know based off of experience and the education that I brought to myself about it. And a lot of the things have rung true on several accounts, that we just live in a culture that is forward facing, forward moving, forward going. And what's next culture, that we don't really hang out in a lot of spaces where this is the end. And this is the way it should be. And this is natural. And this is the stop. We don't allow those spaces to really amplify the humanness and the humanity that it brings. So I think that being asked to contemplate or think about stopping spaces is difficult for people. I think that we relate with things that feel not so good, uncomfortable feelings, vulnerable feelings, sad feelings, to negativity sometimes. And I think that death has that around it, that death is bad. Death sometimes, even with my father's death, I felt that he felt like disappointed. He was disappointing people, that he was, I think that terminally ill people sometimes feel like a disappointment or a negative thing. Like, my illness is a negative thing, when it's inevitably has nothing to do with who they are.
Right.
You are not your illness. You are not your end. You are the essence of your being that was given this life and this expression. And so I could go into a whole talk about that, but there's like that. But I just think that death brings up our humanness. It brings up the humanity of us all, because it's the one thing that threads community together. It's the one thing that's true for us all, is that we're all going to die. So on that same sentence, I always like giggle to myself a little bit, because I'm like, if that's true, then why aren't we talking about it? Why is it a taboo topic? Why is it a bummer? Why is it held in a shelf, somewhere? And then when the time comes, you plop it on your lap and you're overwhelmed and you're mad and you're angry and you're like dealing with all the feelings and perspectives you have about death in the moment of a death, when you could do your whole life thinking about it, when you could say, you know what, I'm scared of death. I'm scared. Like for one, I am Carla Torres, and I'm scared of death. There's big parts of my experience around death that I'm scared of, that I don't want, that I find on different days. I oscillate on different matters, that it's scary because it's a mystery and it's an unknown, and we don't know factually, which our brains love, is to have facts, to have evidence, to have understanding around something that is the biggest mystery, and we don't know till we get there. Right. And I just think that it is a cultural and it is a societal thing, because not all cultures deal with it this way. And that's been something that has also, to answer your last question, given me a lot of solstice and a lot of peace at the fact that when I'm leaning into this, and now I have more of a community that want to talk about this with me. And now I have more of, just kind of like, well, everyone kind of knows me now, that it's like, okay, Carla's going to want to talk about death. Carla's like, at some party, she's going to be that person that somehow it comes up and they're just going to ask you what you do for work. And then it's going to be this, this whole thing, So now it's kind of this like thing that is present that I'm grateful for, but for a long time it wasn't. And I thought there was something wrong with me, that I wanted to talk about it so much, and I would kind of take the audience of like, wow, I want to talk about this, and internalize that as like, there's like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I fixated on this? But I think that the leaning into and learning about the way that other cultures deal with their death, that seem like they think that talking about death is taboo. Some of these cultures, you could see how they deal. Like some cultures keep their dead at home for years and dress them every day.
Wow.
And like keep them in the home, and that's the way they honor until they know that their spirit has left, is really what it is. It's like they believe that there's work that they have to do after this certain amount of time after they've left their body, but energetically there's work that they need to do that the family has to tend to. And once that has been tended to, they'll take them out on a boat, and they'll go on this boat ride, and they'll take them across the sea, and they'll, so there's big ritual and big honoring in other cultures that are way more, I guess, taboo than talking about it. Or like in my lineage, I'm a Hispanic woman, and in Mexico, and it's very much that death is a nurturer. Death is an old midwife that's been with us since the womb, and who walks with us through life, who eventually will meet us on that other side. She's the mother of time. And she's, there's all these beautiful stories and mythology around, Mexican culture and how they hold it. And I could just go on, and
you have the Day of the Dead, right? It's like it is
an honoring.
Yeah, so beautiful.
And keeping your ofrenda active and giving offerings often, which is something I do in my own practice every day. Giving my ancestors coffee, and having my morning coffee with them, and things that I believe. Those are the ways that I really lean into, to know that this isn't taboo, that this is okay, that this is a part of life, and that ultimately me recognizing my end of life experience, or my inevitable end, also brings more joy into my living. It keeps me more aligned with how I'm spending my energy, and how I'm relating, and how I'm being in my life in a more firm and grounded way than I've ever experienced since I've started this journey. And it came with that fear of facing it. Like, wow, I don't know how I'm going to die. I don't know what that's going to look like. It might be painful. It might be horrific. I might get that diagnosis. I might get that car crash. Like you could really spin yourself out as how it's going to happen. But I lean into these practices in my life and this holding of that. I keep death what it is. I don't try to change it or try to make like rose-colored glasses on it. I keep it for what it is, with it like us alongside me. It's this thing that walks with me. It's with me. I don't know. I have a lot to learn from it, and I learn from it all the time. But it's not something that I'm trying to change the identity of it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Just acceptance. Yeah. You have a great for it.
Right.
What does it mean to die consciously? Are dying at home and or the after body care elements of this, and how does one go about dying consciously? Can you tell us more about the elements? And you touched on it. I mean, you've touched on some of these things, like the decisions. Like I would imagine just the awareness about the decisions, which is probably a big part of your job. And the role that you take is the conscious part of it. It's like I'm consciously facing this, and I have a death file. Dying consciously is essentially, Carla.
Yes, absolutely. That answer for one is like, I've thought about it. I've taken it off the shelf, and I've left it off of the shelf, and it's now part of my awareness, and it's part of my existence. And I embrace that. And I'm making decisions around, like, I have my advance directive. I change it if something big or significant changes in my health or my lifestyle. And that's me being conscious about my death and my inevitable end. But also too, I think a lot of it is, so I think you reached out to me about like death contemplation and like some of my practices around that and the why. And it's that as well. It's like, I think about death and I contemplate death because that's how I know I'm going to die with my eyes wide open. Like, I know that I'm going, like, the more that I bring to my attention that this body is vulnerable and fragile, that death is inevitable, that my material assets cannot do me nothing at the end.
Not taking them with you.
Yes, exactly. And that nobody can save me from death, ultimately. Not even the medical system, no matter how much they give me all these things that are wonderful and I'm sure have done miracles for people. At some point, there's not anything anyone can do about my inevitable death. Is me being like, when I imagine that when I'm on, hopefully, in the perfect scenario in my brain, when I'm on my deathbed, that I've integrated my conscious awareness around the fact that I'm a dying human being in a way that I can, there's something spiritual about that, that there's something transformative about that in my dying phase, and that I can be present with it in a way that it's maybe scary, maybe painful. I don't know how that's going to be. And I'm not taking anything off the table, but that I can also elevate from it, that maybe I might evolve from that experience. And also too, for my loved ones, that I can be present, that I can maybe show them a way of dying, that it's about embracing this part of our life, that it's profoundly sad that I'm no longer going to be able to participate in this, because I love it. I love life. I love being a part of I have 2 young daughters, so I love being a part of their life. I love being married. I love the things I love about life, as we all do. But maybe that'll be my moment when I can say, I love this so much, and now it's my time, and be more of I don't know, I guess I think of my daughters as more of a death ideal, that they can remember me for how I embraced it rather than how I was afraid or how I was unconscious about it.
Yeah, I mean, this part of it, you're really touching a tender spot for me, because my sister had a 4-year-old at the time that she died. And so I think, this part around the way in which we're witnessed in our dying is so important to me. And this is something that I'm taking away from that experience as I witnessed her. And this other piece around, we are going to go into this. And this is when I found you on Instagram, I was instantly drawn to the death contemplation practice that you do and that you guide. And so I do want to talk about this next. But it's this idea of the way, like anyone who has an actual practice or a way in facing it and bringing it into the conscious and being aware of this inevitable. And the power of that, just the power of the awareness of facing the inevitable. And for me, when I give myself permission to go to that place, it brings me to the edge of my faith. It brings me to a place where I find myself a little bit in limbo. And I really love that, because that's an invitation for me to like take a deep breath there and to decide, while I have the moment, to decide what I'm going to choose to believe.
Right.
And that's it. That it's like, and I think this is really the power of contemplating the inevitable. But will you tell us a little bit more about this death contemplation practice that you do? Because the first thing that I saw when I found you was this reel where you were sharing that you were about to go into leading one of these practices. And I'm wildly curious about what it is actually.
I think you're speaking of my Lay Me in Honor and Evening of Death Contemplation class. I created this. So death meditations have been going on for ages, and a lot of these cultures that I was kind of touching on contemplate death in their everyday meditations. Like it's always a piece of theirs. And what I was saying when I was saying my body is fragile and vulnerable and death is inevitable, my material assets cannot save me, is actually phrases from a Tibetan mantra that's called the 9 Contemplations of Death. And there's a whole lineage about it, but it's basically like they would repeat these things to themselves daily. Wow. And just continue to meditate on them. And I've done that in my own personal practice, where maybe I might just pick a phrase, or I might just do 3, or sometimes I'll do all 9. And it's very interesting on even a day-to-day thing of what one hits a little bit more tenderly, or maybe makes me kind of all of a sudden go into these stories, or like it's an ever evolving lifetime journey. So that's something that I definitely, if you are interested in getting into or you have a practice of contemplating or meditation to bring in these things, is definitely an accessible and a really profound journey. But my Lay Me in Honor, an Evening of Death Contemplation, is a living death ceremony. So it's on the basis of a practical and spiritual practice of death contemplation for what it is in different cultures, and what I'm also bringing to it from my own personal practice. But it is a journey of starting from where you are in this moment, in your age, in your health, and where you are firmly landing in your life, and a bit of contemplation and kind of integrated questioning that I start with about where you are and who's with you and what do you look like and where's your energy, kind of getting you into like kind of the self-reflection of where you are in your life now. And then it kind of trails into fast forwarding it maybe a year or 2, maybe 5 years, maybe 10, and kind of like this play of like where I am now and what things might be changing. And it's kind of like, well, certain points, it's like, I don't know, because I don't know what the future holds. And it's not to the point to know. It's kind of just this understanding of bringing into realization that you are where you are now. And that's so beautiful. And this time that we have is what we have, and what might be and what might be. But what might be is that at the end we die. So then it kind of goes in through that. And then it goes through the last journey of like kind of this imaginative of that you're on your deathbed. And I kind of go through like the symptoms of dying and like bring that experience as real as possible in a very real, but also kind of like fun and imaginative way, just because our imaginations are so creative, and also really bring in this really profound awareness that you can really use in your death contemplation, which is the point of it. And then to the point where we actually have a living death. And then I take them through death washing, where I actually physically give them what I would do with families or the dying, washing them sometimes it's from their head to their feet, or I kind of just intuitively do it as I would do it even in the moment that someone was dying. And then I shroud them. And this is kind of the peak of that journey, where they're fully shrouded. So their face is covered. So there's definitely that kind of bringing in that uncomfortability. I mean, I always tell people it's not meant to be comfortable. Like death isn't meant to be comfortable. And the fact that sometimes that's the hangups that we have around death and not talking about it or talking about it is that we sometimes think I'll talk about it when it feels comfortable. Like I'll talk about it when it doesn't scare me anymore or all these things. But that's just maybe us getting in our own way, because death is meant to be uncomfortable. Death is meant to bring you into that vulnerability and into your humanity and into your fears and into all the things that we were gifted to feel and experience. And so it's not meant to be comfortable. So that's the pink. And the title, Lay Me in Honor, is actually from the work that I did with Olivia in Sacred Crossings, because when you go to a home funeral or when you've shrouded someone and you've cared for your loved one, then you lay them in honor for 3 days. And that's how they are set, and people come and give their respect so I kind of went off of that as then we're laid in honor. And that's where they're just in that space for some time. I kind of gauge it off of the group, but I try to give it an ample time, because that's kind of the grave-like experience of really going into the grave and into that dark space, into that unknown, and really contemplating what it is you do. Because it's a living death, it goes without saying that you're thinking about the things that are worn out in your life. You're thinking about the ways that you're out of alignment, that you want to be more in alignment with the caveat of death being the light that's shining on that. And that's what death contemplation in its best description is using death as a catalyst to live more purposefully, to live more in alignment, to not waste your energy, to recognize that this is real. Like life is real. Life is happening right now. And wake up to whatever's happening in your life, because we don't know. You don't know what it's going to be like for you. And I don't know what it's going to be like for you. So when you have moments with people, you're having living moments. You're not just chatting with your friend. You're having a living experience. So in that grave-like experience, you're kind of really immersed with that. And then I slowly take them out and we talk about it. And it's always different. It's such a different experience with every group I get. And it's just always really beautiful and transformational.
It sounds profound. It sounds like it has the potential to be a deeply profound experience. With some something that has the potential to very quickly shift, right? The perspective. It's like just a different perspective. We're going to stay with this, I think, a little bit, but just shift gears just a tiny bit. What have you learned about death and about life and living through your work of being a death doula? I would imagine that death has been a great teacher for you, and each person that you hold space for is a teacher. Starting with your papa, and it sounds like, the first lessons that kind of wove themselves through with his passing. But you're really sitting, you have the intimate experience of witnessing death and dying. And so I would love to just, if I may, because it would be really generous of you, to share this. What have you learned? What has this taught you about living? I'm imagining that it's a little bit of, instead of it being this death contemplation practice, it's your lived experience of holding space for people as they take their last breath. And that has to be really profound for you. I also would love, if it feels okay for you, I would love for you to just share with us, like, how do you do that? I think because this is such a it's such a pain point. It's such a moment of fear that you're literally facing with people that you have lived, I don't know how many times now. How do you do that as a living person? Right? Like, I'm really intrigued about that. If it feels okay for us to go there.
Yeah.
But I also feel like you're a wellspring of, and maybe we can do a part 2 if this feels like really juicy, but I feel like anybody who sits with people who are taking their last breath is a wellspring of information around a pivotal moment that is going to come for all of us, the inevitable, as you say. And you are like sitting on a pile of gold around what this experience looks like, how it feels, what most people experience, what it feels like to witness it, because you've witnessed it now however many times. And so I would imagine you can feel your way through the universal things, and also pull out the nuggets of big, like, teachings or big moments, or like, I would love it if, it feels like a really generous thing to ask you to share with us, but could you share with us just a little bit of this wisdom that you've been gifted with in this?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I'll just say that everyone that I've sat with, or I've had been an honor, because it's truly an honor to be able to be alongside someone's dying experience. And I never, ever take those moments for granted. And sometimes I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, I'm just so grateful of the times that I've been able to walk through this with someone until their last days. And it's a gift to me. Like, sometimes they say to me, like, I'm so thankful for you, or thank you. And I'm just like, want to do the same back to them. Like, no, thank you. Like literally, this is such a gift to me, not just because of my passion around this and all the things we've already talked about, but just in my human experience, to walk alongside someone in their last days and then to be a part of their last breath is, as Olivia, I keep bringing her up, but she's, again, such a teacher to me and so wise, but she calls it, anytime that you're in a room or get an opportunity to be bedside with someone is holy ground. And I think that in a nutshell, is the presence and the way that I relation with death. And when I am bedside with someone, is I treat it as such. And obviously I'm a human and I'm vulnerable and I'm affected, but I always just, on a very much like big front, I always just to make sure that I'm completely present, that I'm not taking with me what happened to me early this morning, or, how I want things to go, or, I'm very much try to be a vessel of service, that I am in service of this dying process for this person that's taking this journey. And that's the space that I hold within it. Mm-hmm. And everyone that I've had the opportunity to sit bedside with are my heroes. Like, they're all just, everyone's dying experience is so vastly different from one another, even though, like, as a death doula, yes, like, I went to these courses and got these educations so I can be more informed about the dying process and the symptoms and how that works. And it's fascinating to me, but everyone does it so differently. And it's so beautiful and it's so profound in the way that it happens for each individual. And the ability of, I don't know if this is just, there's just something about this work that is very much about alignment, about that the people that I've been given the opportunity to be bedside with has been very much aligned with my spiritual journey, or it just feels like it's not just anybody. It feels very much like we are keen in this way. And so I've been gifted with these opportunities of these people within their last moments or their last hours who share what's happening on the other side. Wow. And it's been time and time again where I started it out with my dad, sharing his, and then it's just been back to back where I just get these moments where all of a sudden this wisdom of these people who are dying come out and they share it with me. And I'm just like, oh my God, like I don't have words when those things happen, because they're just so, like, again, those unexplainable parts of this portal space that is death. Yeah. And so, and they're gifts, and they're wisdom gifts. They teach me, they're things that I treasure, that I hold, that I'm like, wow, like no one's like, that will never happen again in that scenario, in that way. And it's just so beautiful. Yeah. So I'm getting a little off trail because I'm thinking of all the people.
Perfect. But I mean, I think there is no better way, in my estimation, to, in my own personal experience, to name it other than to call it holy ground.
Mm.
And perhaps it's not even in that realm, and the sanctity of it, and also the honoring and the respect that you have for this work. It's kind of an off limits question even to ask about, like, to be able to glimpse into that, those final moments, or to glean any of that wisdom or that gifting, because it is so holy. But just hearing you and feeling you in the way in which you did share helps us to understand how profound it is, and what a gift it is, and how beautiful it is. I love that you said that. It's not terrifying. It's not scary. This is not your experience when you're sitting beside people. It is, you're describing it as you're witnessing a beautiful experience. And
yeah, I mean, there's still pain involved, and there's still uncomfortability. I witnessed people in a lot of excruciating pain, but we work to get them comfortable. We work to get them what they need. And I guess I'm specifically in these beautiful moments is when it's been regulated, where their pain management is good, and they're having moments of like, whoa, the body is depleting, the body is shutting down. But then there's this conscious element that arrives from them, because I think pain at end of life has a purpose. And don't get me wrong, do I want to be in uttermost excruciating pain when I die? Absolutely not. And I know that I'll have things in line to help me deal with that and manage that. But I also think that the pain at end of life to leave this body is purposeful.
Me too.
And I also and I'm curious about that experience in a very fundamental, my end of life experience, not outside of that. And I think that the ways that watching people work that out is where I have found, and this is maybe going to sound so crazy, but where I have found that consciousness does exist outside of the body, because the more excruciating pain someone is, the more that they are consciously leaving their body. And those have been the times where I've had conversations with people of there was this one individual who I loved, and he actually coming up on his year anniversary since his passing, that I was giving Reiki to. And sorry, do you have time for a story? Are we good? Okay, awesome. I was giving him Reiki, and it was our normal time, our weekly thing. And during it, he was talking. But his eyes were closed, but he was talking, and he was doing lots of things with his hands, and he was instructing, and he was like very keen on like, we have to get this bow and arrow made. We have to get the arrow made, and this person's going to go get this supplies, and this person. And I was just doing my Reiki, and I was just, doing the things. And then he would come to for a moment and be like, I'm so sorry, I'm jabbering. And I'm like, no, it's fine. It's, but in the times when he wasn't jabbering, he was in excruciating amount of pain. He was wanting the nurses. He was unsettled. He didn't want to lay down. He was very, so we were very much working on getting him comfortable. And then anytime he would get comfortable, he would start talking again, and he would start making this bow and arrow. And I was just listening, and I was just like, this is so amazing that has this whole, like this purpose, this meaningful purpose, or maybe a distraction or something that he's working on, like he's doing work. He's doing something on the other side to set up what's going to happen next. And that's my belief.
Yeah.
Is that even when people may not be consciously speaking at end of life, but they're in their dying phase and they're unconscious, which is really normal, they're still doing work. They're still working things out. They're still figuring it out. And then after, in this particular situation, when I was done, I was like, I just asked him because I felt like I had been working with him for 6 months. And so I felt like we had had that comfortability. And I just said, were you talking? Are people here? I said, are people here? And he said, yeah. And I said, do you know them? And he said, some of them. Mm-hmm. And then I said, does it feel better to be there? I just said like there than it is to be here. And he said, yeah. And he died at 7:00 that evening.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I feel like how you called it, this consciousness, access to this other consciousness or this other part, this other place. That is it, right? This is the doulaing that you're doing. It's the transition. And so I would imagine, and in my own experience, you do have a witnessing of that transition and of the access that we have into this other realm. And I think
that's even in the Reiki that I do is a healing modality, but just in my own, I guess, woo of it all is that I'm not helping them stay in this form, and I don't have to say that to them. And also people might get quite frightened if they knew exactly what I was doing, but I'm not helping them. I'm energetically helping them let go because these people are very sick and and at the end of the day, if it was me, and I know I can't speak for everyone, but if I was very unwell and my body was not well and I couldn't do majority of things to participate in this life, and it was evident, I would want that help. I would want that help to energetically let go. And that's the work that I guess is the kind of like when someone's saying, it always kind of like made me giggle when I got into this work because so many people are like esoterically like, I hold a presence or I hold a space, which is very true. But I kept wanting to be like, no, what's tangible about that? Like, what is the service and the action that I'm doing that is helping my community at end of life? And how do I define that? And you can define it in so many ways. But a big one is the care techniques of what I'm doing to help them transition. And a lot of it is my own spiritual awareness and intuitive being that I've studied and done on my own, that I know energetically I can help people untie the knot, and so to speak.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, you have a gift. I would imagine this work is not for everyone. You have to feel called, and in your experience with your father and listening, really moving in the direction of that curiosity when that loss happened for you was what opened it up for you.
Absolutely.
The time goes so fast with these, and also this is really, we may have to do a part 2 because there's so much.
I love that.
At the end of each episode, I like to ask the same 3 questions to every guest as I wrap up. And the first one is, which do you relate to the most, whole, healed, or holy, and why?
I'm going to say whole, because I just feel like, just off of this conversation and also the work that I'm doing, a lot of the times when I was thinking about this question, I think of things being separate, like life, death, all these different things. But I really identify with everything being whole. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm in a dying experience or a very life-giving experience. This is all part of the whole.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's extra beautiful hearing that from you, Carla, with what you do, with an appreciation for all of it. Yeah. Number 2 is a book that you love or one that you've gifted the most.
Yeah. This one was hard for me because I think of all the books. And I will just say, I'll just have to be honest, in and out of my work, it's not a death and dying book or recommendation, even though I have those. But Rumi, the quintessential poems of Rumi is something that is like a sacred thing on my bookshelf that is worn out and has so many notes and markups within it, and just so much process and journey that I often want to lend to my friends, but I'm like, no, I'll just give you this because I need this on my shelf and it's very close to me. And that would be the book.
Yeah, Rumi, if we could take one book with us, I think it could be Rumi, right?
Absolutely.
A quote or mantra that you love or one that guides you.
Yes. So, this one is actually there's like a two-parter in it because I kind of like love both of the sayings, but I think Socrates said, I know that I know nothing, and that makes me wise, or something. I might be reversing that, or I know that I am wise because I know that I know nothing. And then there's like another variation of that by, I think it's like Thomas Jefferson, that's like, he who knows best knows how little he knows. Just because I just really love, like, I love, all the things I'm fascinated about, and I love life but I also love the mysteries, and the mystery of life and the mystery of death, obviously. And the space holding that we've talked about today is very much of my affinity of being able to be in spaces that we don't know. And I love moments when I just don't know, and where that leads.
Me too. I'm a forever student, I say, and I love that. Can you please share the ways in which listeners can find you or connect with you if something that we've shared here has given them a tingle?
So I'm on Instagram and on social media at A Venerated Death. And I don't know, and it will be in the show notes. It's A Venerated Death. And then also you can check out my website that has information about me, my offerings, how to get in contact with me, and that's avenerateddeath.com. And then also I have an online store there. I make a lot of amazing death contemplation candles and vigil candles and all these different things, grief candles, and also some death care products that I have and I sell that I like to make handy for my community for honoring and keeping these spaces sacred.
And I would imagine most of your work is in person, locally in your community. And do you travel, and what bits of this, do you do the death contemplation practice virtually sometimes?
I do. So I do everything. I can do it all virtually, pretty much. Like I've even done a lot of my death doula work with families that are maybe in Colorado, but are maybe a 4-hour drive away, which I'm always willing to travel. So that's something that I always tell them. But sometimes families just need a little bit of advocacy and help over what's going on in the moment, making sure that certain things are in place and in alignment, who to contact, a resource person. And also sometimes like I organize just food trains for people to make sure that families and caregivers are eating. Mm-hmm. So I definitely can do everything virtually, except for my Lay Me in Honor class. That's very much in person. But my parent loss grief circle and my death in the morning discussion are virtual.
Okay, beautiful. I will be sure to put all of that in the show notes.
Wonderful.
Thank you for being here with me today, for sharing your wisdom, and for the huge heart work that you're doing around death and dying with grace and big, big acceptance and love. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. It means a lot to me that we have shared this moment of deep conversation. If you feel inspired or touched by something in this episode, please leave a comment and/or a review. For more in all the ways, please find me at Whole Healed Holy on Instagram and at www.patricia-russo.com on the web. Stay close, please, and know that you are whole, you are healed, and you are holy. I love you. Until next time.